The horn of a truck tore through the night silence, but Michael, 46, didn't hear it. His eyes were fixed on the eviction notices, the black ink dancing under the dim light of the room. Every word was a blow, a brutal confirmation of the abyss that had opened beneath his feet. Indiana had always been his home, and the road, his livelihood. But now, the very road that sustained him was tearing him down. The diesel engine, once a sound of hope, now seemed to roar a funeral dirge. Shame was a knot in his throat, suffocating the words that should explain to his family why all this was happening. Michael, the trucker who broke down on the road, was just one more in an America where hard work is not always enough to hold back the tide of bankruptcy. The smell of diesel was a second skin for Michael, a fragrance that once represented freedom and sustenance. At 46, he knew the cost of every mile driven on Indiana's roads. Each freight was a promise of livelihood and a step towards building a future for his family. In recent months, however, that promise had dissolved into smoke. Diesel prices had skyrocketed, a 40% increase from the previous year, according to alarming data from the Energy Information Administration, swallowing most of his hard-earned profits. Loads, once abundant and easy to secure, became scarce, and the few that appeared paid less than what was needed to cover costs. Michael felt the rope tightening around his financial neck, but he refused to believe he was in trouble. He was a trucker, a working man, forged in the resilience of the road, and working men, in his mind, didn't break. This denial of reality, this stubborn refusal to acknowledge the warning signs, was the first and most dangerous step towards the precipice of bankruptcy. Many, like Michael, ignore the initial alerts, clinging to the romantic idea that continuous effort and sheer willpower will be enough to turn the situation around. The truth, however, is that bankruptcy, more often than not, is not a sudden, catastrophic event, but rather the insidious culmination of a series of financial decisions and omissions that accumulate silently, like a slowly forming avalanche. The maintenance of his old Peterbilt, a faithful road companion for over a decade, began to demand more than he had. Worn tires, frequent oil changes, expensive replacement parts. Each repair was a painful hole in his already dwindling reserves. Weeks passed. Freights were carried out with sacrifice, but the money coming in barely covered essential operating expenses, leaving little or nothing for other bills. Michael began to fall behind on important bills, such as rent and utility payments, prioritizing diesel and truck maintenance so as not to lose his only means of livelihood. The credit card, once a tool for occasional, well-controlled emergencies, became a daily crutch, an illusory lifeline, accumulating exorbitant interest that he could barely afford to pay. This increasing reliance on credit for basic expenses is an unequivocal and alarming sign that financial health is in sharp decline. According to the Federal Reserve, credit card debt in the U.S. reached a historic record of over $1 trillion in 2023, a grim reflection of the financial squeeze many American families are facing. Michael was drowning in a sea of debt, but shame and pride prevented him from speaking about his situation. He withdrew into himself, hiding the harsh reality from his own family, a behavior unfortunately common among those facing financial hardship. Isolation only deepened the problem, making the search for solutions and necessary support even more distant, creating a vicious cycle of despair and silence. The day the eviction notices arrived was a turning point, a moment of brutal shock and revelation. It was no longer a question of if, but of when disaster would strike his family. Michael felt the weight of shame crushing him, a burden heavier than any freight he had ever transported. How would he tell his wife, who had always trusted him to provide and keep their home safe? How would he look at his children, who saw him as a hero? Bankruptcy wasn't just about numbers and negative balances. It was about the loss of dignity, home, hope, and identity. This isolation and refusal to ask for help, whether from friends, family, or professionals, are crucial and often insurmountable barriers to recovery. It is estimated that over 500,000 families in the U.S. face eviction annually, and the lack of communication and proactive planning is an aggravating factor that accelerates this painful process. The fear of judgment, wounded pride, or the simple inability to admit one's own vulnerability prevents many from seeking professional advice, such as financial counselors or credit agencies, or from openly discussing the situation with their loved ones. Michael needed to understand that acknowledging the problem and seeking support was the first and most courageous step toward finding a solution. Silent bankruptcy, the kind that corrodes from within without anyone realizing it until it's too late, is the most dangerous of all. The red alert is not a sign of weakness, but an urgent call to action, an invitation to reassess the situation clearly and seek help before it's too late. Embrace reality, no matter how tough it is, so you can change it. The news of the eviction hammered incessantly in Michael's head, a cruel and deafening echo of his inability to support his family and keep their home safe. He was not alone in this invisible and desperate battle. Millions of Americans, like him, face the painful and humiliating reality of seeing their finances collapse, leading to the loss of assets, homes, and dignity. Financial and economic experts are unanimous. The causes of personal bankruptcy in the U.S. are multifaceted and complex, but some stand out disturbingly, forming a devastating pattern. For Michael, the explosive and uncontrollable increase in the cost of living was the hardest and most unexpected blow. Diesel, as he well knew, was not the only villain in this story of financial hardship. Prices of basic food, housing, transportation, and, crucially, healthcare skyrocketed in recent years, far outpacing wage growth for the vast majority of American workers. Alarming data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics show that persistent inflation and wage stagnation eroded families' purchasing power, making the household budget an impossible equation for many to balance. The minimum wage, in many states, simply does not keep pace with the real cost of living, forcing millions to accumulate debt just to survive and keep a roof over their heads. Michael, even working exhaustively, putting in long hours on the road, felt he was running on a never-ending treadmill, with the finish line of financial stability growing ever more distant and unreachable. Another crucial factor, often underestimated until the crisis sets in overwhelmingly, is the painful lack of an emergency fund. Michael lived from day to day, with the next load dictating his financial security and ability to pay bills. An unexpected truck repair, a week with few freights, or a sudden health issue, and his entire financial house of cards would collapse without warning. According to a shocking Federal Reserve survey, nearly 40% of Americans don't even have $400 saved for an emergency, making them extremely vulnerable to any unforeseen event. This means that a simple flat tire, a flu that prevents him from working for a few days, or a broken essential appliance can start a spiral of unsustainable debt and lead to ruin. For a trucker like Michael, whose livelihood directly depends on the health and functionality of his vehicle, not having a fund for repairs was like driving without brakes on a steep and dangerous downhill slope. The absence of a financial cushion turns minor setbacks into catastrophes of gigantic proportions, pushing families into chronic debt, and eventually into bankruptcy, as there is no financial buffer to absorb life's inevitable economic shocks. Excessive debt, especially credit card debt and high-interest personal loans, is another common and devastating trap that devours American families' budgets. Michael found himself caught in a suffocating, vicious cycle, using credit cards to cover basic expenses and urgent truck maintenance. Interest rates, often above 20% and even 30% annually, turned small debts into insurmountable mountains, where minimum payments barely covered the interest, leaving the principal untouched. He paid the minimum, but the principal barely moved, as most of the payment was absorbed by exorbitant interest. The American Bankruptcy Institute points out the consumer debt is one of the main reasons for bankruptcy filings in the U.S., surpassing in some years even health problems. Furthermore, unexpected health problems and exorbitant medical costs contribute significantly to the financial ruin of millions. Although Michael was not facing a serious illness, many Americans are driven to bankruptcy by exorbitant medical bills, even with health insurance. An in-depth study by the Kaiser Family Foundation revealed that medical debt is the leading cause of bankruptcy in the U.S., with treatment and medication costs out of control, creating a health and financial crisis. For Michael, the lethal combination of rising costs, lack of savings, and accumulated debt created the perfect storm that threatened to sweep his family out of their home, a scenario unfortunately very common in various American communities that struggle to survive in an increasingly unforgiving financial system. Michael's despair was palpable, a knot in his throat that kept him from breathing deeply. But deep in his soul, a faint flame of hope stubbornly flickered, fueled by his love for his family. He knew he could no longer lament. He needed a plan, and fast, to reverse the chaotic situation he was in. The first and most crucial strategy for Michael, and for anyone in a similar situation, is an honest and meticulous assessment of debt and expenses. Without a clear overview, without knowing exactly where the money was going and how much he truly owed, any attempt at recovery would be like driving in the dark, aimlessly, doomed to failure. Michael, with a heavy heart and focused mind, gathered all his statements from the bank, credit card, truck maintenance bills, personal loans, and even small informal debts. The list was daunting, a true hydra. 2 months of overdue rent, the truck loan that seemed to never decrease, credit card debts with sky-high interest rates that doubled every month, fuel bills that felt like robbery. He also meticulously listed all his monthly expenses, from essentials like food and truck fuel to what could be considered superfluous, like the daily coffee at the truck stop or the cable TV package he barely watched. By doing this detailed analysis, Michael identified that, although diesel was a high and unavoidable cost, credit card interest, and some small, but recurring and unnecessary expenses were draining his money faster than he had imagined. This step, no matter how painful and revealing, is fundamental and liberating, as it offers clarity, an accurate diagnosis, and a concrete starting point for action. With the list in hand and a clear understanding of his situation, Michael moved to the second stage, which required courage, determination, and a good dose of humility, creating a rigorous budget and proactively negotiating debts. At first, it seemed impossible to cut expenses without compromising his and his family's livelihood, but he was surprised by what he achieved. He started cooking more meals at home and packing lunches for the road, saving hundreds of dollars a month on restaurant food or roadside diners where prices were inflated. He canceled some streaming subscriptions he barely used and postponed the purchase of non-essential household items, like a new electronic device he desired. For debts, he mustered the courage and, with a choked voice, called the credit card company. He explained his situation honestly and transparently, without beating around the bush or making excuses, and to his surprise, they offered a payment plan with reduced interest and more affordable installments, realizing it was better to receive something than nothing. With the landlord, he negotiated an extended period for the rent, promising to pay a larger amount in the coming weeks, showing his good faith and commitment. Negotiation is a powerful tool, and often, creditors are willing to help to avoid complete bankruptcy, as it is more advantageous for them to receive part of the money than to deal with the bankruptcy process. Michael also explored the possibility of consolidating his credit card debts into a personal loan with much lower interest rates, reducing his overall interest rate and simplifying his monthly payments into a single installment. The third crucial strategy, which brought new breath and a sense of empowerment to Michael, was actively seeking additional income sources and optimizing his existing resources. He realized that no matter how much he cut expenses and negotiated debts, he needed more money coming in to accelerate his recovery. Michael, as an independent truck driver, had several options, and he pursued them with zeal and intelligence. He began actively looking for backhaul loads, meaning cargo that would pay him to return to his base after a delivery, avoiding the loss of money and time on empty return trips, which were previously pure cost. He also started registering on online freight platforms and specific apps for truckers, which directly connected carriers to companies needing transportation, significantly expanding his job opportunities and allowing him to negotiate better prices for his services, without the mediation of large trucking companies that took a large chunk of the profit. This gave him more control over his earnings and the ability to choose more lucrative and efficient freights. Furthermore, Michael considered the sharing economy and using his skills beyond driving. On days when his truck was parked at home, he thought about using it for local deliveries of larger goods for small businesses in the area, or even renting it out to other trusted independent drivers, turning an idle asset into a source of passive income. He observed colleagues in his profession who, in addition to driving, used their mechanical skills to perform minor repairs on other trucks in their home garage, generating a considerable extra income. The path to financial recovery is arduous and requires discipline, sacrifice, creativity, and an open mind to new opportunities. But Michael's story shows that it is possible. By facing reality head-on, skillfully negotiating with his creditors, and seeking new and diverse sources of income, he began to see the light at the end of the tunnel, slowly climbing out of the hole he was in and rebuilding his financial life, brick by brick, with a new perspective and a renewed sense of hope and control. Michael was in the midst of a financial storm, fighting to keep his head above water. But with each step of his arduous recovery, he realized a simple yet painful truth. Much of his current situation could have been avoided if he had access to fundamental knowledge. The problem wasn't just the lack of money itself, but the profound lack of understanding about how to manage it, how to protect it, and how to make it work for him. Michael, like millions of Americans across the country, learned to work hard, to sweat for his money, but he was never taught how to keep it, how to make it grow, or how to shield it from unexpected crises. This is a systemic and worrying flaw in the U.S. educational system, a problem that affects generations and perpetuates cycles of debt and financial instability. Schools rarely teach basic budgeting, the principles of investing, the insidious dangers of compound interest when in debt, or effective debt management strategies. As a result, millions of people enter adulthood unprepared for the financial challenges of the real world, becoming easy prey for unexpected crises, debt traps, and the constant, agonizing feeling that money is never enough, no matter how hard they work. Michael deeply regretted not having learned sooner how money truly works, and how his daily decisions, no matter how small, so drastically impacted his financial future. One of the most blatant and costly mistakes Michael made was the painful lack of a clear budget and long-term financial planning. He lived on autopilot, spending what he earned without a clear plan for the future, operating under the false and dangerous premise that hard work and resilience would always guarantee his livelihood, regardless of external conditions. There were no established savings goals, nor strategies to deal with unforeseen events, such as an expensive truck repair or a drop in freight loads. When diesel costs has rocketed and loads drastically decreased, he was caught completely by surprise, without a penny saved to cushion the blow. Financial literacy teaches the fundamental and liberating importance of creating a detailed budget, tracking every dollar that comes in and out of your account, and setting realistic and achievable financial goals, whether it's building an emergency fund, buying a home, educating children, or the long dream of retirement. According to the National Financial Educators Council, financial literacy has been proven to reduce financial stress, increase personal wealth, and significantly improve quality of life. Michael realized that if he had budgeted years earlier, he would have noticed the warning signs in advance, such as gradually rising costs and decreasing profits, and would have adjusted his finances before the crisis set in, avoiding imminent eviction and humiliation. Another common mistake, and one that Michael experienced firsthand and bitterly, was the indiscriminate use of credit and a profound ignorance of the mechanics of interest. Credit cards seemed, at first glance, like an easy and convenient solution for cash flow problems, a quick way to solve immediate financial difficulties. However, they became an unbearable and suffocating burden due to the sky-high interest rates that he could barely afford to pay. Many fall into this trap, using credit without understanding the true cost of borrowed money, or how compound interest works relentlessly against them when debts are not paid in full each month. Financial literacy teaches how to use credit intelligently and strategically, to understand interest rates, the crucial difference between good debt and bad debt, and the vital importance of paying bills on time to avoid penalties and protect one's credit score. Furthermore, Michael had no knowledge of basic investing. He didn't need to be a stock market guru or a Wall Street investor, but understanding the basics of how money can grow over time, even in small amounts through compound interest or simple investments in low-risk funds, could have made a huge difference in his financial life. Financial literacy is not just about avoiding bankruptcy. It's about empowering people to build a secure and prosperous financial future, transforming lives and communities across the country, offering hope and control. Michael was learning this lesson the hard way, but he was determined to use his learning as a powerful tool and a legacy for his family's future, ensuring they would never again face such hardship. The rigorous budgeting discipline and persistent debt negotiation were essential and painful steps for Michael, but he knew that to truly climb out of the hole he was in and build a solid, resilient financial future, he needed to go further. He needed to consistently and diversely increase his income. In a country where inflation eroded purchasing power and wages stagnated for many workers, the search for extra income became a pressing necessity, not a luxury, for millions of Americans struggling to support their families. Michael, as an independent truck driver, had several options, and he explored them with zeal and intelligence. He began actively looking for backhaul loads, meaning cargo that would pay him to return to his base after a delivery, avoiding the loss of money and time on empty return trips, which were previously a pure cost. He also started registering on online freight platforms and specific apps for truckers, which directly connected carriers to companies needing transportation, significantly expanding his job opportunities and allowing him to negotiate better prices for his services without the mediation of large trucking companies that took a large portion of the profit. This gave him more control over his earnings and the ability to choose more lucrative and efficient freights. In addition to optimizing his primary source of income, Michael began to explore, with a mix of curiosity and hope, opportunities for passive income, an idea that previously seemed distant, complex, and reserved only for the wealthy. He didn't have large savings to invest in real estate or high-capital businesses, but he began researching low-risk investments accessible to small investors. He took the courageous initiative to talk to a local financial advisor, something he never thought he would do, as he considered it rich people's stuff or for those who already had a lot of money. The advisor guided him on the importance of starting to invest, even with small amounts, through regular and consistent contributions. Michael learned about index mutual funds and government bonds, which offered modest but consistent returns over time, and were accessible to small investors who start with just a few $100s. The idea wasn't to get rich overnight, but to make his money work for him, even if slowly, through the power of compound interest, which, when investing, works in your favor. This investment education demystified a world that seemed reserved only for the rich and powerful, showing Michael that anyone can start building a portfolio and thinking long-term, cultivating a more secure financial future. Michael also considered the sharing economy and the intelligent use of his skills and assets beyond driving. On days when his truck was parked at home, he thought about using it for local deliveries of larger goods for small businesses in the area, or even renting it out to other trusted independent drivers, turning an idle asset into a source of passive income. He observed colleagues in his profession who, in addition to driving, used their mechanical skills to perform minor repairs on other trucks in their home garage, generating a considerable extra income and valuing their knowledge. The key to extra income and smart investments is creativity, a willingness to learn continuously, and the ability to adapt to new market realities. It's not just about working more hours, but about working smarter, diversifying income sources, and making money grow in different ways, even if slowly and incrementally. Michael, who previously only saw money flowing in and out linearly, now saw opportunities around every corner, transforming his mindset from just a truck driver to that of an independent entrepreneur, building a safer and more resilient path for his family's future with a renewed sense of control over his finances and cautious optimism. Michael's struggle to escape bankruptcy taught him invaluable lessons etched in his memory, but he knew that the real challenge began now: to remain financially secure and prevent relapses, ensuring that the shadow of eviction would never again loom over his family. It wasn't enough to just climb out of the hole he was in. He needed to build a solid and unshakable financial foundation so he would never fall back into it. The first and most crucial lesson for a sustainable future is the rigorous continuity of budgeting and constant financial monitoring. Michael could not simply revert to old habits of spending without control or ignoring his finances. He continued to use his budgeting app and a simple spreadsheet he had created, meticulously recording every expense, no matter how small, and every income that entered his account. Monthly, he carefully reviewed his finances, comparing what was planned with what was real and adjusting the plan as needed, like a captain adjusting his ship's sails. This constant and proactive vigilance is the fundamental pillar of financial security, allowing him to identify deviations and potential problems before they become uncontrollable and devastating crises, like the one he had faced. It is the crucial difference between navigating with an updated map and accurate GPS and navigating blindly in turbulent waters. The second fundamental strategy that Michael embraced with unwavering determination was the creation and continuous strengthening of a robust emergency fund. He had personally felt the pain, despair, and humiliation of not having this financial cushion when adversities suddenly arose. Now, he dedicated a portion of every freight, no matter how small, to his emergency savings, treating it as an essential and non-negotiable account, as important as rent or fuel for his truck. The goal was to accumulate at least 3 to 6 months of essential family expenses, an amount that would give him peace of mind and security in case of unforeseen events. This reserve acts as an impenetrable shield against the unexpected, whether it's an expensive and urgent truck repair, a sudden illness that prevents him from working for a period, or a temporary loss of income due to an economic slowdown. Having this fund provides not only material security, but immense peace of mind, preventing small unforeseen events from turning into major financial disasters, like bankruptcy. Statistically, families with emergency reserves are significantly less likely to file for bankruptcy and much more resilient to unexpected economic shocks. Finally, Michael understood the vital importance of continuous financial education and the diversification of his income sources as pillars for a truly sustainable financial life. He did not stop learning after the crisis. On the contrary, the experience spurred him to seek more knowledge. He continued reading books on personal finance, listening to specialized podcasts, participating in free webinars, and, crucially, talking to friends and colleagues who had good financial management, learning from their experiences. With each new piece of knowledge acquired, he felt more confident in making intelligent decisions and planning his future with clarity. Furthermore, he began to think about ways to diversify his income more strategically, not just with extra freights, but perhaps even with a small side business that could be operated by his wife at home, creating multiple revenue streams for the family and reducing dependence on a single source. Financial security is not a destination to be reached and forgotten, but a continuous journey of learning, adaptation, and proactive planning. Michael's story, the trucker who broke down on the road and rebuilt himself based on new tools, knowledge, and a renewed mindset, is a powerful testament that, with discipline, financial education, and unwavering perseverance, it is possible not only to emerge from the deepest crisis, but also to build a secure and sustainable financial future, ensuring that eviction notices, shame, and fear will never again be a threat to him and his beloved family. He became a living example of resilience and financial planning for his community.